Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the second part of this town hall for Grantseeking. I just wanted to give you a little rundown of what we're going to do here. So in the first half, the focus really was on discussing the importance of partnerships and collaborations. As you heard over and over again, everybody said it's very important to collaborate and partnerships. And we had some wonderful speakers there. This afternoon, we'll talk a little bit about how to go about cultivating these partnerships. It's all good and wonderful to say, just, activate your network, talk to your partners, get different people to be involved, but how to do that can often be daunting and a little bit confusing. And we have invited some people who are very good at it naturally in some ways, or who have developed the skills, if they're not comfortable doing that, to do so comfortably. In this part, I am going to tell you a little bit about, just give you some my basic thoughts about fundraising. And my particular focus, this morning, there were a lot of discussions about applying to NEA grants, NSF grants, NEH grants, but I'm going to talk specifically about foundations. In some ways, foundations are easier, although they do have deadlines. They're not these hard and fast deadlines. You're not being evaluated by your peers. You're actually being evaluated by program officers and the boards of foundation, which are a mix of all different types of people. So this is a little bit of some thinking about how you would approach a foundation. And as one person once said during a talk about fundraising, if you know one foundation, you know one foundation, meaning just what applies to one foundation does not apply to another foundation, although it could. So just bear that in mind. They can be small family foundations. You and your spouse could say, I want to set up a foundation. You assemble a staff of yourself and your spouse and your children, and you give out money, small family foundation. People do this for tax reasons. Or you could have, a lot of us, when we think about the foundations, we're thinking about the very big foundations like Mellon or Ford, robber baron money, if you will. The family's not involved anymore. They're big established foundations. They have billions of dollars under asset or millions of dollars, and it's their they need to give out that money. So they're always looking for grants. They have to give out a certain amount of money each year for tax reasons. So we think, oh, I need money. How do I get money? One of their struggles is, how do I dispense with ethically and appropriately the money I'm supposed to give? So you should think about that. And that takes us to the way I would suggest approaching foundations. So when you approach a private foundation, one thing I would just caution is to step back and change your mindset a little bit. So instead of thinking about, what I need from the grant and how I'm going to get it and how my proposal is going to be the best idea possible, you want to also be thinking about what exactly is this foundation or grant maker seeking to do. A lot of this information is public. Why are they giving out this money? What is it that they want in this particular program? If it's in arts, if it's in LGBTQ issues, criminal justice, higher education, in that particular area, they want to define themselves and differentiate themselves from other foundations. So what is it that they want to do and how you can help them with that? And I'm not at all suggesting that you should just tailor your research to do whatever the foundation wants. In fact, that would probably backfire, because they want to hear from you, the person who is the expert and who has ideas. What you're thinking is to help guide them to be a more prominent voice in that particular subject. So it's a bit of a two-way street, and you want to think about how you can work with them, but never diluting or sacrificing or, having to trade off your own thinking about things. And that, of course, would be respected as well. I would also say you should think about how I said your grant making fits in their particular purpose. What is it that you bring to them that would enhance their project and their goals? As I said, you're the experts, or if you're not, you want to make yourself the expert. But what your value to them is what you bring to them to move their project in a way that would change the national conversation or help the community or whatever it is they're trying to do. So again, this is a two-way street. And not to trivialize it, but again, I think Erica said this morning, it's a little bit like dating. You do the search, you find the right match, it takes some time, There's some ugly ducklings. Some people are more kissable than others. And then once you have the contact, then you actually have the courtship. So you have to interest them. You have to make them excited about your work. You have to make them notice you. And then there's the proposal. And that's a whole process too. And I think Erica and Sonia also mentioned, once you get the grant, that might not be such a honeymoon either. There's a lot of discussion and negotiation that goes into making the grant work for all of you. And so it's an ongoing process. I don't have a lot of time here, so I'm just going to talk about three myths very quickly. When I talk to faculty and artists, I find artists are in this space right now where they're being much more of activists, and that works positively for them. That's a space in which foundations are really working very openly and directly. But as researchers, especially in a place like the Graduate Center where there's somebody who's been established in their research for 20 or 30 years, they might have this attitude of, I want to do my research and that's all I want to do, and I want funding for my research. So I think one of the myths might be, and this might be at the graduate student stage, this is true. Grants are awarded by the best proposal. You write the best proposal, you look at all of the questions and the criteria, you nail all that, you write this grant, it's brilliant, it's even beautifully written, you send it off, and voila, I'll have the grant. But as you know, often that doesn't happen. Why doesn't that happen? I think just relying on the power of your ideas and your writing a proposal, although that is the first step and absolutely critical and essential, that is not the last step, and that is not the most effective way. So when it comes to national grants, NSF, NEH, NEA, usually you can't really speak to any of those people unless they have these sessions where they invite you to call in and find out, give you some information. But when it comes to foundations, there are often ways in which you can approach some of the people who are involved in the foundations. Some foundations are very open. You could actually contact a program officer and they would respond to you. Others, if you did that, dead silence, you would never hear from them. But that's not to say they're not interested in your project. They're just not going to respond to you because they're inundated or that's just not their policy. But you still want to try to get to somebody who works in the foundation, a program officer or an individual who has the foundation's ears, somebody who's on the board. And board members are not always these removed, wealthy people who we have no access to. Often people on the boards are also somebody who represents the community or somebody who's an expert in that area. So they're not always inaccessible rich people that you have no access to. All different types of people are board members. But I would also say someone who works in another foundation. If you have a relationship with another foundation, you could ask that program officer, you know, I know your foundation doesn't support this, but do you know a foundation who does? And they'll say, oh, right, Jim or Mary over there at that other foundation, they work on this. I'll let them know, or I'll give you their contact. So there's lots of different ways, if you think creatively, about how to do this. And again, this isn't to say that if you don't do this, you will not get the grant. Of course, there are RFPs, they come in, but just remember, if there's an RFP, hundreds, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people are responding to that, and they only give out X number of grants. There's a lot of grants that will be given that don't have RFPs, because you're talking to the program officers, and you know what the next big idea is, the flavor of the month. You wouldn't know that if you didn't talk to the program, people in the program, because it's not on their websites. These are ideas that are being developed. So if you're in on it from the beginning of when the ideas are being developed, then when they actually launch the program, or even before so, they might think, oh, so-and-so over there, I remember, they know about this, let's go talk to that person. So there's different ways to get grants aside from, in addition to writing the proposal, which is always required. You're going to have to write something, even if it's just a one-pager. And this goes into the idea of grants are awarded to the most brilliant ideas. Yes, grants are given to the projects. And if you think about grant writing, it is part of your research. It is part of how you develop your idea. In order to develop your knowledge and idea, you're writing. It's just a different form of writing. So it's true that funders are always looking for game-changing ideas, innovative research, of course. That's what they're looking for. Ideas that will affect the national conversation, public policy. But again, rather than seeking targeting the search for who will fund your project, think about who the grant maker is, the areas they're funding, and the areas that they might be likely to fund. It might not be listed on their grants webpage or somebody you talk to that they're funding a certain area, but you might be having other conversations with the program officer and they might be thinking about this. So it's just to get ahead of everyone else. Also, large foundations, especially like Ford or Mellon, you think, oh, that foundation does this. Well, they did that 5 years ago, or they did that 10 years ago. Now they've moved on to something else. So don't just assume that it's a particular foundation and they're going to stay with that. So I'll give you a concrete example. Mellon, for example, we think of Mellon in higher education space. And Mellon tends to get associated with the prestigious elite universities. That's where they're giving all their money, millions of dollars. But that has changed. In the last few years, they've really become interested for the first time in community colleges. You would never have associated Mellon with community colleges 10 years ago. They have become more open to public universities. I mean, they always have, but because the landscape, political landscape is changing, because some of their priorities are changing, because some of their leaders have changed, Mellon is not, the Mellon today is not the Mellon of 1950. So think about that also, that the funders are also changing their priorities and their needs. And if you're having conversations, you will know that and you will know what those needs are. I think the last thing I would address is how to get your ideas, you should not keep your ideas close. Again, this morning it stressed collaborations, but I can't stress enough. Activating your networks, bringing them into your ideas and discussing them together will not only produce hopefully more fruitful project, but also they will activate people who they know. They might know somebody who is in the grant-making funder space. So that's a way to not only increase your networks, but you can also think about bringing some different nuance to your project. They might have different ideas that you didn't think about. Lastly, I would say in a big university, you all have university presidents, you all have provosts. These people are also speaking to grant makers. They're actually invited or knock on the door of grant makers, big foundations, and they have conversations with them. And one never knows where those conversations are going to lead. And when they have conversations with them, the foundation might say, oh, you know, we're really interested in X idea. Have you ever thought about that? And then they have to scramble to figure out who in their university works on those ideas. So it's also good to make yourself known to your department heads, your EOs. If you have an opportunity, I'm sure you do, to talk to senior administration, to provosts and people in that office. Then when they actually are looking for that idea, you'll be one of the people that they bring into the project. And those are the bigger projects. Those are the multi-million-dollar projects, the very high, near million-dollar projects that are institutional projects. So if that was an interest of yours, that's a way to get into that space. And I think we are running out of time. I would just say that just like you are trying to come up with new, creative, innovative, never done before ideas or make a contribution to your field in ways that nobody has ever thought of. Foundations, they're not people too, but foundations are also thinking about that. How do we distinguish ourselves? How do we keep ourselves relevant? So foundations like Ford is just a major foundation. They were not always the major foundation, but they've figured out a way to keep themselves relevant, make themselves even more relevant. A foundation like Mellon, who you think higher education, especially graduate education, how are they going to survive? They have figured out a way to keep themselves relevant. So it's particularly the big foundations, but I think all foundations, they want to be known as the foundation for X. And in order to do that, they need your ideas, and they need to fund your ideas, and they need to be able to push those ideas on a national spectrum and be able to, if possible, affect changes in policy, all different areas. So don't think of them narrowly just as foundations. They really think of themselves as quite important, and they probably will respond better if you think so too. See, I think at this point we'll just move on to a discussion. I thought it would be best, we don't have a section in our program for a fundraiser and a faculty person to have a discussion. And so this would be a nice way for you to hear how we've collaborated and what works for faculty and how a fundraiser can find someone and think, you know, that faculty person is a great person to collaborate with. So I invite Juan Battle on stage. Wherever you want to sit, Juan.
That's over here. Okay. Oh, this is great. So I'll be Michelle Obama, you be Oprah. Exactly.
So I'll just give a brief introduction. Juan has many titles, so I'm just going to read them off because I can't remember them. Juan is at the Graduate Center, and he's a distinguished professor in sociology, urban education, public health, and social welfare, also coordinator of the Africana Studies Certificate Program, and teaches at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. Okay, enough reading. So as I mentioned to the audience, I brought you up because I think of you as kind of a natural collaborator, cultivator. Juan is, I found, Juan is certainly not the only faculty person, but there are certain individuals, not just faculty, who are just naturally good at collaborating and cultivating. And because Juan is good at that, I find that our partnerships are very productive. Juan seems to sense what I need, and Juan delivers what I need from him. So I would just open up the question and talk about your experience at CUNY, fundraising, working with fundraisers, how that has been for you.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Excuse my voice, I'm getting over a head cold, but I'll live. Just so I know who I'm talking to, could you raise your hand if you're a student? Thank you. Faculty? Staff? Thank you. All right. The first thing I would know, I'm going to just ramble for like 5 quick minutes and then we'll just have a conversation and do Q&A. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Cool. The first thing I would know, and this is probably, I'm sure was shared this morning, and in the end, people give money to people who they know and like. Just like you do with your own money, it's my experiences, foundations, and other entities do the same thing. So you want them to get to know you and like you. That's important. I work here at the Graduate Center, so I work mainly with dissertation students. And I think about fundraising the same way I do as I tell my graduate students. It's a dissertation, not masturbation. Don't do it by yourself. Get you some help. So you really want to reach out, and I want to echo Helen's point around building networks and building supports and building teams. In my case, just briefly, my experience, I first started at CUNY in 1994. At the time, I was joint Hunter and the Graduate Center. Within my first semester of working here, as a faculty member, I quickly realized there were two, shall we say, types of faculty and how they were treated. At first, I thought, as a sociologist, oh, maybe it's based in race. Like, no, that wasn't it. Maybe it's based in gender. No, that wasn't it. Maybe it's based on those who have tenure versus those who don't. No, that wasn't it. Come to find out rather quickly, it was those who were bringing in a hell of a lot of money and those who weren't. Those who were bringing in a lot of money, the president knew their first name, the provost knew their kid's birthday. They had a whole different relationship. And so I became interested in that, developing that relationship. Because in the end, in the academy, if you don't know, publications and grants is what purchases you favor. Forget everything else, including teaching. Just don't be the worst in your department, but don't worry about being the best either. So I went to the program officer. At the time, the bulk of my line was at Hunter. I went to the program officer, not called program officer, grants officer, thank you. I was like, Hillary Fisher is, okay. I went to the grants officer at Hunter, Bob Buckley is still there, and I said to him, in the social sciences, who are the 5 biggest grant writers at this institution? And he gave me their names. One of them, and this is before everybody and their brother had email accounts and websites and that kind of stuff. Now it's easy to find them. But back then, I'd actually go track them down. And track them down I did. And in advance, because of that list of 5, actually even a list of 10, on that list, one was black. So I just knew that'd be the person I'm going to work with. That went over like a fart in church. I hated him on site almost as much as he hated me. But that's okay. I then went about developing those relationships nonetheless. And I know, right? You just met me. But poor Helen, she's had to suffer through this, But she's good at ignoring those bits and just keeps going. She just keeps going. But so I met this guy, Nick Freudenberg, and I approached him. Some of you may have heard of him. I approached Nick Freudenberg, and I was very clear. I was like, I want to learn how to write and run grants, because I realized those are two different skill sets. And Nick looked at me and didn't say a word, and all he said was, let's say this was a Tuesday. He said, meet me Friday morning at 7:30 at Rikers. I'm like, well, first of all, black men try to avoid going there. I'm not sure what's going to happen, what's going to go on. But at 7:30 in the morning, I was at Rikers. And then over a period, and God bless Nick Freudenberg, because he became my mentor 8 Ways a Sunday. And I worked with him on different grants I literally told him I would collate and staple. Whatever you need to have done, I'm willing to do. And this was because back then my teaching load was a 4-3. It was teaching a 4-3 load, having just moved to New York City, et cetera, et cetera. And it developed the relationship. And so we went from writing, him being the PI, then me being co-PI, then I was the PI. And I'm proud to say among the victories we had, the School of Public Health, CUNY School of Public Health, actually started with a grant Nick and I wrote umpteen years ago. And so developing those relationships and going in humble, not so much with, this is what I want to do, what I want to know, and how I think what I want to know can help you. No, it's the exact opposite. How can I help you? You just tell me how. Who cares what I know? I think that's very important. The last bit, and then I'll throw it back over to Helen. The most wasted opportunity, in my opinion, by both graduate students and faculty is academic conferences. It is such a wasted opportunity. If you think I'm in sociology, that's the only conference I go to every year, is the American Sociological Association. At that conference every year, every major funder who even thinks about funding anything related to sociology is at that conference. And I'm amazed at how many people get up, get dressed, make their way to the airport, get undressed to go through TSA, get their clothes back on again, get on a plane, and will fly somewhere to be at a conference so they can sit on a panel with 3 people they don't know, talk to 8 people they don't know for about 15 minutes, and call that a successful conference. Are you an idiot in motion? Who has that kind of time? Conversely, what you could do, because now everything is electronic, you can go online, and they have it, it's all well organized. If not, contact the organizers, they'll tell you. And you can find out every funder there. And you can send them an email in advance and say, Dr. Lipschitz, I see you're going to be at this conference, and I see you're going to present on Tuesday morning at 10:30. I'm going to be at that conference. I'll be at your session. However, can I also get on your calendar for about 15 minutes? Because and they're there. You could line up 10 of those. But instead, even faculty, they go hang out with people they went to grad school with. I'm like, call that child tomorrow morning. You have a cell phone number. Why are you talking to her? She ain't got no money. Don't waste your time. And conferences, and that is the space to do it. For students who work with me, meaning they're on my grant and I'm paying for them to go to a conference, they know before I'll pay for you to go for a conference, you come to me with at least a list of 10 people you've already scheduled to meet with for at least 15 minutes while you're at that conference in Chicago or Arizona or wherever it's going to be. Not the session. Who cares about your session? You're there to build that social capital.
Great. I have one more question, which is going to change the subject, and then I'm going to open it up. You don't have yep, that's yours. So you said something to me once about keeping your relationships, personal relationships, and your fundraising relationships separate. What did you mean by that? Or do you? Maybe not.
No, I do. Oddly enough, I have a lot of friends who work in philanthropy. Over the years, I've gotten to know them. They work in philanthropy, and I oftentimes tell people, know the difference between your colleagues and your friends. And I think people merge that, and they think that because someone gave them money that they're friends. No. They expect something from you. They gave you that for a reason. And one of the main reasons you even spoke to them is because they have the capacity to give you the money. And it's a professional relationship. And so there are a few people who can be more irreverent than me, but I'm clear about boundaries and functions and what we're here to do. And when it comes to money, unfortunately, you only got one time to screw up. Because once you get a rep for that, it's a wrap. No one's going to give you any more money.
Great. Well, we have time for a few questions. And then we're going to continue the conversation. No, we're going to continue the conversation, but just a couple questions for Juan and I, and then we're going to invite some other people up and have continued discussion. So does anybody have a question? Or we could move on. Please move up to the mic, and then we can all hear you. It's great to ask questions of us. It's your one opportunity to do so, or afterwards, of course.
Really intrigued by the idea of screwing up once and you're out, and I was wondering if you could talk about some of the ways that maybe you have seen other faculty members screw up their relationships with funders. No personal stories required unless you...
Oh, I got some. You want to do that, Helen?
Go ahead.
Of course, the biggest one is not using the money for what it's supposed to be used for, because that also gets your institution in trouble. Not handing in reports when reports are actually due, misrepresenting what you have the capacity to do one way or another. To me, those are kind of the big ones where people just, I tell people all the time, don't make commitments you cannot honor. And if you've made the commitment, kiss sleep goodbye. Just get it done. For people who work with me on projects, my running line is, don't tell me what you went through, tell me what you got done. Yeah. I mean, because it's got to get done. It's got to get done. And sorry that, someone got sick or you have a kid, my kids are grown now, but, I had kids and a partner and a life and parents and, cats and dogs and you still got to do what you got to do. And when you find, I think water seeks its own level. From practically day one, Helen and I hit it off because, and I say this respectfully, not everyone I've dealt with who operate in Helen's capacity broadly have the same level of follow-through, shall we say. They say they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they don't do any letter of the alphabet. They just pick numbers. They don't do anything at all. And, I think one of the reasons Helen was attracted to me is because if I say I'm going to do something by a certain time, it's done. No matter where I am on the planet, and I travel a lot. And so, partnering with people who are like-minded, I think helps.
One of the things that people think about, the biggest thing that people think about when they apply for a grant is, how much money am I going to get and how am I going to spend it? But really, especially, and I'm talking about big project grants, especially institutional ones or ones involving centers, is to really, really think about what is needed for that grant. So I think it was Sonia this morning saying she ended up taking on so much responsibility. It would have been helpful if she had put aside money, and if it's NEH or NEA, there's money there. Put aside money for an administrator. You can't do everything. That's a legitimate thing to ask for. You put an administrator there. They can, because if you take on everything, that's 2 jobs for you. And if you're willing to do that, that's fine, but that's not good for your mental health. It's probably not good for your colleagues or your students either. So to think about all of those things. The other thing is that all too often, an organization they desperately need the money. Universities, nonprofits, there's a grant. It doesn't really fit into what they're doing, but hey, I'll take the money because we would need that money. That's extra work for the organization. It's not a well-managed project, and like Juan said, by the time you're done, you're probably not going to get more money from that funder. So take the proposals very seriously, just like you take your research seriously. It's part of your own integrity. It's part of your own research, the way you handle your research and all your other relationships. It's a funding relationship. It is a relationship. So those are some important things to think about. Any other questions?
I'd like both of you to talk for a minute about listening in your conversations with funders and what happens when you get a little bit of daylight between what's written or what you thought you had and research about the funder and what you're hearing with the decision maker.
Right. It's a good question. So When you have an opportunity to meet with a funder, and it could be informally, but I'm thinking of a more formal space where they invite you to the office or they come to you, usually you go to their office, and you have some time with them and you have an idea. I want to do X, and you're all excited because you think they're going to fund X, but then they talk about something else. It's not what you wanted to do, or it's a little bit of both. Again, you should think about, do I really want to, or am I able to do this other thing that they want? Chances are you probably will be, but do you want to? And if you do, you can continue those conversations. Funders, as we talked about before, they have their own agenda, not always, but often. And if that agenda is something that is completely out of line with what you're doing, it's not going to be a good match. Again, it's like dating. You can compromise. Will you be happy in the marriage? I don't know. But if you think through carefully and work with them, there are ways in which you can probably come to a happy negotiation with that. The fact that you're in the room with them or having a conversation with them, they're recognizing you as an expert or somebody who's very good at something, somebody who they want to think about. If it doesn't work out that time, you still have their card, they still have yours, you can go back to them. So it's never a wasted opportunity.
As a faculty member, I had different agendas and different motivating factors at different seasons of my career. When I was an assistant professor, I was extremely motivated by this amorphous concept called tenure. Then when I became, even before tenure, I was very attracted to this amorphous concept called 3-night summer salary, and being able to buy out my teaching. So for that, don't judge me. I'll do most things for money, if there's enough money on the table. And so I would find myself in the office, and not only is there daylight, there'd be a huge, sun, several suns. And I'm like, well, could I do that? And would it bring in money for my summer salary? I would fully admit there were grants I ended up doing that I had no inherent interest in. There have been times in which program officers have called me and said, Juan, I know your plate is full, but blah, blah, blah. And if it's enough money, suddenly I can move some stuff off my plate, stuff that ain't paying, get that off the plate. So it's really, now when it comes to an idea that you have, it is, as Helen said, it's sort of a negotiating process where you're, okay, I want to do A and B, you're asking for D and E, let's try to locate C somewhere in the middle. And maybe we'll do B, C, and D and forget A and E. You know what I mean? So it really is a process. Professor King.
Hi. You've talked a lot about developing relationships, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about timelines. So I'm about 2.5 years out from a project that might be about a $500,000 project. Can you talk about the length of time, and I know it varies greatly, but in developing relationships on the way to getting major grant funding?
I don't think there's a one response for that. One of the reasons why I asked Juan to sit here with me and have this discussion is Juan is always on the hunt for funding or programs.
For ideas.
For ideas.
It's the life of the mind that I care about.
And funding for those ideas. So I think once you are impassioned about a project or really thinking about a project, and you know how that is, you're doing some research and you're always thinking about it and you talk about it endlessly and your friends and your spouse don't want to hear it anymore. You keep talking about it. But those ideas are infectious, and you will, if you're thinking about it, just open that door and think, I'm thinking about this idea. Part of making this idea possible is getting funding in. So that just kind of broadens your environment and your landscape for when you're talking to people, when you're looking at things. Of course, you're going to have to spend a little more time just looking for the funding, but think of it as that process of your research and not, oh, now I have to do the funding part. It can be a very interesting part of the funding. And for me personally, who also create funding for myself, although that time taken to write the grants, I always think, oh, really? Now I have to devote X amount of time to writing that proposal. It often helps me to sharpen the idea because I'm not just writing endlessly. I actually have to explain what it is that I'm trying to say and who am I speaking to and how am I best going to say it. So instinctively, I kind of resent the time I have to spend writing that proposal because I want to be writing the book, the project, whatever, making the project. But that time is actually can be very useful time to think the ideas through more clearly and explain it better, because you have to be able to explain it to someone else. So, sorry, I can't answer that question, but you should be thinking about it all the time, and those doors will open if you're thinking about it.
Unfortunately, there is no the answer. It's literally the gamut. If you think, as you were asking your question, remember the project we worked on where we were up in Connecticut X number of years ago? That project, it was literally landed in my lap. Kathy Cohen negotiated that at Chicago. And it literally, and I went to grad school with Kathy Cohen. So the answer to that question is, it started in 1990. But not really. But then the program officer, Barbara Klugman, we hit it off like that. And so even after that project ended, Barbara was very interested in continuing to fund me. There have been other relationships where, oh my God, did I cultivate? And did I sit through boring meals with boring people over and over again? If you do this grant business for any amount of period of time, you'll invariably be at some table where you know your job is to make those who are dumber than you feel smarter than you. It's just a part of the game. Don't hate the player, hate the game. And I did that several times, and it bore nothing. It bore nothing. One project Helen and I worked on, my therapist told me I'm okay now. So I worked my ass off and went to meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting downtown in the courthouse, where was I was going? Somewhere. That thing bore bus change. A project we're currently working, and it was a lot of work that didn't give anything really. The project we're working on now, I was at a dinner party and trying to change the subject, and the program officer was sitting there saying, I really want to support some good ideas. What ideas do you have? And the next thing I know, I'm emailing Helen, I think I got some money. And so I wish it was it's a gamble. You don't know.